The story of the man who called himself Lord Voldemort does not begin with a boy in an orphanage, nor with a spell cast in hatred. It begins centuries before, in the damp, shadowed earth of history, with a name and a legacy. The name was Slytherin, one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a wizard of immense power and a chilling conviction. He believed that magical education should be reserved for the pure of blood, for those whose lineage could be traced through unbroken wizarding families. This belief was so strong that he quarreled with his fellow founders, and in the end, he left the school he had helped build, but he did not leave it unprotected. Deep beneath the castle, Salazar Slytherin constructed a secret chamber, a place only his true heir could open. Within it, he left a monster, a basilisk, meant to one day purge the school of those he deemed unworthy to study magic. His legacy was one of pride, power, and a deep-seated prejudice that festered in his bloodline for generations. That bloodline, thinned and twisted over the centuries. The great wealth and influence of the Slytherin name dwindled, but the pride remained, hardening into a bitter and resentful arrogance. The family that descended from him came to be known as the Gaunts. By the early 20th century, they were a caricature of their former glory, living in squalor in a dilapidated shack on the outskirts of the Muggle village of Little Hangleton. The Gaunts clung to 2 things with ferocious intensity: their pure blood ancestry and the last remaining relics of their heritage. One was a heavy black-stoned ring, crudely engraved with a symbol that would later be recognized as the mark of the Peverell family, though the Gaunts knew it only as their own. The other was a heavy golden locket, marked with an ornate serpentine S. These were not just heirlooms, they were the proof of their superiority, the last tangible evidence of a grandeur that life had denied them. The head of this desolate household was Marvolo Gaunt, a man whose mind was as decayed as his home. His hair was matted, his eyes were a strange, startling light brown, and his voice was a rasp of fury and entitlement. He spoke of his pure blood as if it were a shield against the world's indignities. Even as those indignities piled up around him, he ruled his 2 children not with love, but with fear and contempt. His son, Morphin, was perhaps even more unhinged. Morphin's face was brutish, his eyes small and divergent, and he communicated in a sibilant hiss of parseltongue, the rare ability to speak with snakes that was the most famous and lasting gift of their ancestor, Salazar Slytherin. Morphin was violent, unstable, and shared his father's obsessive pride and his hatred for all things non-magical. Then there was Merope. Merope Gaunt was a figure of profound tragedy. Beaten down by her father's cruelty and her brother's taunts, she seemed almost a squib, a person of magical parentage, with little magical ability of her own. Her hair was lank and colorless, her face plain and pale, and her eyes, like her brother's, stared in opposite directions. She lived in a state of perpetual fear, her magic suppressed by the constant abuse she endured. When a Ministry of Magic official, Bob Ogden, visited their home to serve a summons for Morphin's assault on a Muggle, he witnessed the full horror of the Gaunt family. Marvolo, enraged by the intrusion and the suggestion that his son answer to wizarding law for attacking a mere Muggle, attacked Ogden. Both he and Morphin were eventually subdued and sentenced to 6 months in Azkaban, the wizarding prison. It was in their absence that Merope found a sliver of freedom. For years, she had watched a young man from the village, the handsome and wealthy son of the local squire. His name was Tom Riddle. He was everything the Gaunts were not: privileged, popular, and entirely Muggle. Merope had harbored a secret, desperate obsession with him, an impossible fantasy for a girl in her position. With her father and brother gone, the fear that had smothered her magic receded. For the first time, she was able to truly use her power. The exact method is not recorded, but the nature of what followed is clear. Merope Gaunt, armed with a newfound magical confidence and a lifetime of yearning, ensnared Tom Riddle. It was not a courtship of equals. It was an act of magical coercion, most likely through the persistent use of a love potion, a draught that induces a powerful infatuation, a counterfeit of love born from obsession. She convinced Tom Riddle to elope with her, and they were married. For a time, Merope lived her dream. She had the man she desired, and she was pregnant with his child. Perhaps, in her delusion, she believed that he would truly come to love her, or that the coming child would bind him to her forever. So she made a fatal mistake. She stopped giving him the potion. The moment the magic wore off, Tom Riddle awoke, as if from a trance. He found himself in a strange marriage to a woman he barely recognized, a drab and desperate creature who was now carrying his child. He saw not the witch who had charmed him, but the daughter of the local vagrants. The revulsion was immediate and total. He abandoned her without a backward glance, returning to his family in Little Hangleton, telling a story of being tricked and bewitched, a story his fellow Muggles would interpret as mere metaphor for a youthful folly. Merope was left alone, pregnant, and utterly broken. The return of her despair seemed to extinguish her magic once more. She had lost the man she had stolen, and with him, she seemed to lose the will to live for herself. She sold the one thing of value she had left, Slytherin's locket, to a merchant of dark artifacts named Burkes. She received a pittance for it, only 10 galleons, a fraction of its true worth. With that small sum, she made her way to London. On New Year's Eve, 1926, she stumbled into a Muggle orphanage, a grim institution called Wool's Orphanage. There, within the hour, she gave birth to a son. She lived only long enough to name him. She named him Tom, for his father, and Marvolo, for her own. His last name, she insisted, was Riddle. And then Merope Gaunt, descendant of Salazar Slytherin, turned her face to the wall and died. She left her son with nothing but a name, a fractured heritage, and an orphan's cold welcome into the world. He was a child born not of love, but of deception and despair, a union forged by magic and broken by its absence. This was the foundation upon which Lord Voldemort was built. The boy, Tom Marvolo Riddle, grew up in the bleak, colorless world of Wool's Orphanage. It was a place of routine and regulation, where affection was scarce and individuality was a liability. From the very beginning, he was different. He was a quiet, self-contained child, unnervingly handsome even as a boy, with his mother's dark hair and his father's classic features. But behind his controlled exterior, a strange and powerful nature was developing. He did not cry often, but when he did, it was with a chilling focus. He was unusually independent, never seeking the comfort or approval that other children craved. He understood, instinctively, that he was separate from them, and this separation was a source not of loneliness, but of strength. Strange things happened around Tom Riddle. They were not the chaotic bursts of accidental magic common in young witches and wizards, uncontrolled manifestations of fear or anger. Tom's magic was different. It was focused, deliberate, and often cruel. He discovered early on that he could move things with his mind, an ability he honed in the privacy of his small bare room. He learned that he could make animals do his bidding, not through kindness, but through sheer force of will. And most disturbingly, he found he could make people hurt. The other children at the orphanage learned to fear him. He was not a bully in the traditional sense. He did not use his fists. He used a silent, watchful pressure that unnerved them. Quarrels with Tom Riddle ended with the other child inexplicably ill, or their most treasured possession vanished. He cultivated an aura of mystery and menace. He also began to collect trophies. Not souvenirs of happy memories, but tokens of his power over others. A yo-yo, a silver thimble, a tarnished mouth organ. These were items stolen from his peers, not for their value, but for the act of taking them, for the reminder that he could impose his will on the world. He kept them hidden in a small cardboard box. a secret hoard of his nascent dark magic. He also discovered another of his inherited gifts, Parseltongue. The ability to speak to snakes came to him as naturally as breathing. To him, it was not strange, it was simply another thing that set him apart, another confirmation of his specialness. He felt no kinship with the other orphans, no desire to belong. His goal, even then, was not to be accepted, but to be dominant. He wanted to be unique, to be powerful, to be feared. He was a solitary king in a tiny, gray kingdom of his own making. This carefully constructed world of control was breached on a summer's day when Tom was 11 years old. A man came to visit him, a man unlike any he had ever met. He was tall and old, with a long silver beard and hair, and he wore an impeccably tailored suit of plum velvet. His name was Albus Dumbledore, a professor from a school called Hogwarts. Dumbledore had come because Tom Riddle's name had appeared in the Register of Magical Births, and it was time for him to be introduced to the world he truly belonged to. The meeting was a subtle battle of wills. Tom was immediately wary, his mask of polite curiosity firmly in place. He assumed Dumbledore was a doctor or a psychiatrist, someone come to study him, to label him. He met Dumbledore's gentle questions with a cold, guarded intelligence. Dumbledore, for his part, was deeply unsettled. He saw a boy who was not just powerful, but who had already learned to master his power for dark ends. He knew about the incidents at the orphanage, the whispers of fear that followed Tom. He confronted the boy directly, not with accusations, but with facts. He mentioned the rabbit, hanged from the rafters, and the two children, Billy Stubbs and Amy Benson, whom Tom had terrorized in a cave during a summer outing. Tom, seeing no point in denial, admitted his actions with a flicker of pride. He revealed what he had done to them in the cave, a terrifying experience he would not describe, but which had left them silent and afraid. He wanted to impress this strange visitor, to show him his unique talents. Dumbledore, however, was not impressed. He was alarmed. He made it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated at Hogwarts, that the school had rules against theft and cruelty. To prove the existence of magic, Dumbledore performed a simple feat. He set Tom's small wardrobe on fire with a wave of his hand, and then extinguished the flames, leaving the furniture completely unharmed. The sight of this controlled, effortless power captivated Tom. It was a confirmation of everything he had ever suspected about himself. He was special. He was a wizard. Dumbledore explained about Hogwarts, about the two worlds, magical and muggle. He offered Tom a place at the school and provided him with a list of required books and equipment, along with a small fund to purchase them from a special ministry account for needy students. Tom's eagerness was palpable, but so was his arrogance. He asked Dumbledore if he was like him. Dumbledore replied simply that he was a teacher. Tom then revealed his ability to speak to snakes. Another piece of his specialness he offered up for inspection. Dumbledore's reaction was calm, but inside, his concern deepened. Parseltongue was a rare and often infamous gift, most famously associated with Salazar Slytherin himself. Before he left, Dumbledore delivered a final, quiet warning, a piece of advice that Tom would remember but never heed. He told him that at Hogwarts he would be among others with his abilities, and that his brand of coercion and cruelty would not make him special there. For Tom Riddle, the revelation of the wizarding world was not a joyous discovery of a new home. It was a vindication. It explained why he was different, why he was superior to the sniveling children and the drab, unseeing adults of the orphanage. It was the key to a much larger kingdom, a world where his power would not be seen as a dangerous abnormality, but as a talent to be honed. As he prepared to leave for his new life, he felt no sadness, no nostalgia for the only home he had ever known. He felt only a cold, thrilling sense of destiny. The name Tom Riddle, common and unremarkable, was already beginning to feel like a temporary disguise, He was leaving the gray world of Muggles behind, stepping into a world of magic, where he intended not just to exist, but to conquer. The boy who left Wool's orphanage that September was already on a path to become something far more terrible than a playground tyrant. He was on his way to becoming a legend in his own dark mind. And so, Tom Riddle's early life at the orphanage established his profound isolation and his burgeoning, controlled cruelty, setting the stage for his entry into the magical world, where he sought not community, but dominion. The journey to Hogwarts on the 1st of September was a revelation for Tom Riddle. He boarded the Hogwarts Express at King's Cross Station, finding his way to platform 9 3/4 with the innate cunning that defined him. Surrounded for the first time by hundreds of other magical children, he felt not a sense of belonging, but a keen, analytical curiosity. He watched them, listened to their chatter about Quidditch and famous wizarding families, and recognized the chasm that separated his own grim upbringing from their privileged lives. He was an outsider, but he would not remain one for long. He possessed an easy charm that he could turn on and off like a lamp, a tool to disarm and attract. He was handsome, polite, and projected an aura of quiet confidence that drew others to him. Upon arrival at the castle, a magnificent, sprawling edifice of towers and turrets, Tom was sorted, as all first-year students were. The sorting hat, placed upon his head, took barely a moment to sense the ambition and the heritage coiled within his mind. It shouted out the word, "Slytherin!" and Tom went to join his house table, a faint, satisfied smile on his lips. It was exactly where he expected to be. He had already learned of the 4 houses and of their founders. The name Salazar Slytherin resonated with him, a whisper of greatness from the distant past. He felt an immediate sense of rightness, of coming home not to a place of warmth, but to a place of destiny. Hogwarts was, for Tom Riddle, an arsenal. He absorbed knowledge with a terrifying appetite. He was a brilliant student, universally admired by his professors, with the notable exception of Albus Dumbledore, who taught Transfiguration at the time. While others, like the avuncular potions master, Horace Slughorn, saw a prodigy of immense promise, Dumbledore saw the same coldness and cruelty he had witnessed in the orphanage, now expertly hidden behind a veneer of impeccable manners and academic achievement. Tom was a model student. He became a prefect, and later, head boy. He was deferred to by his peers, admired by his teachers, and he won special awards for his services to the school. But this public persona was a meticulously crafted fiction. In private, within the confines of Slytherin House, he began to gather a following. They were not friends. Tom did not have friends. They were a mixture of loyalists, bullies, and the ambitious, all drawn to his power and his charisma. They were the first of those who would later be called Death Eaters. He held court in the Slytherin common room, a dark, charismatic figure, his followers hanging on his every word. He confided in no one, but he gave them a cause, a sense of purpose rooted in the old prejudice of blood purity. He spoke of Slytherin's legacy, of the greatness of their shared heritage, and of the need to protect the magical world from the perceived contamination of Muggleborns. His primary obsession, however, was his own heritage. He despised his common name, Tom Riddle. It was a link to the Muggle world, to his unknown father who had abandoned his mother. The name Marvolo, from his grandfather, was his only clue. During his school years, he began a deep and patient investigation into his family history. He spent countless hours in the library, poring over ancient records of wizarding families. He knew he was the heir of Slytherin. He could feel it. The ability to speak Parseltongue was the undeniable proof. He needed to find the line that connected him to his great ancestor. Eventually, his research paid off. He found the name Gaunt and traced the lineage back, connecting the dots between his mother, Merope Gaunt, and the last known descendants of Salazar Slytherin. The discovery was a moment of profound, cold triumph. It confirmed his superiority, his right to power, but it also contained a bitter truth. He learned of his father, Tom Riddle Sr., the Muggle who lived in Little Hangleton. He realized that he was not a pureblood. He was a half-blood, the son of a witch and a Muggle. This knowledge filled him with a silent, consuming rage. The man who had given him his hated name had also tainted his bloodline. It was an imperfection, a stain on his grand destiny, and he vowed that one day he would erase it. This discovery solidified his turn away from the name of his father. He began to experiment with an anagram of his full name, Tom Marvolo Riddle. Rearranging the letters, he created a new identity, a title of power and fear. I am Lord Voldemort. It was a name he began to use with his closest followers, a declaration of his true, self-created self. His search for his heritage led him to the greatest secret of his ancestor. He learned the legend of the Chamber of Secrets. The story of a hidden chamber, a monster, and an heir who would unleash it, fascinated him. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he was that heir. During his 5th year at Hogwarts, after years of searching the castle, he found it. The entrance was in a girl's bathroom, marked with a tiny carved serpent on one of the sinks. Whispering to it in Parseltongue, he watched as the sink descended, revealing a dark, hidden passageway. He had found Slytherin's chamber, and within it, he found Slytherin's monster. The basilisk, a gigantic serpent whose gaze brought instant death, recognized him as its master. For Tom Riddle, this was the ultimate confirmation of his power. He was the heir, and he now had a weapon to fulfill his ancestors' dark work. He unleashed the basilisk on the school. The attacks began subtly. Students were found petrified, frozen in place, their eyes wide with terror. They were the lucky ones, those who had seen the basilisk's reflection rather than its direct gaze. The victims were all Muggle-born. Panic gripped the castle. The staff was baffled, and the Board of Governors threatened to close the school, a prospect that horrified Tom. Hogwarts was his home, the only place he had ever truly felt powerful. He could not allow it to be taken from him. The final attack came upon a girl named Myrtle Warren, a morose and unpopular student who had been hiding in the same bathroom that concealed the chamber's entrance. She saw the basilisk's yellow eyes directly and died instantly. Her death raised the stakes. The Ministry of Magic became involved. It was clear the school would be closed if the culprit was not found. Tom knew he had to stop the attacks, but he needed a scapegoat. He found one in a large, clumsy third-year student named Rubeus Hagrid. Hagrid had a passion for magical creatures. The more dangerous, the better. He had been secretly raising a young acromantula, a giant spider, in a cupboard in the castle dungeons. Tom, using his authority as a prefect, discovered Hagrid's secret. He publicly accused Hagrid and his spider of being responsible for the attacks and Myrtle's death. It was a masterful piece of deception. The school authorities, desperate for a solution, believed him. Hagrid's spider, Aragog, escaped into the Forbidden Forest, but Hagrid was expelled, his wand snapped in two. Tom Riddle received an engraved trophy for his special services to the school. He was hailed as a hero. It was his first great triumph, a perfect lesson in manipulation and the use of power. He had silenced the basilisk, framed an innocent boy, and secured his place at Hogwarts, all while appearing to be a model of student virtue. Dumbledore was the only one who remained suspicious. He could not prove Tom's guilt, but he watched him more closely than ever, convinced that the danger had not passed. He also persuaded the headmaster, Armando Dippet, to allow Hagrid to stay on as groundskeeper's assistant. With the Chamber of Secrets closed for now, Tom turned his mind to a far greater ambition. He was mortal. This simple, unacceptable fact was the ultimate limitation on his power. He could not be the greatest wizard in history if he was bound by a natural death. His research shifted from his ancestry to the darkest and most forbidden of magical arts, the art of cheating death. He found whispers of a method so vile, so unnatural, that it was rarely mentioned even in the most obscure dark arts texts. He learned of the Horcrux. A Horcrux is an object in which a wizard has hidden a fragment of his soul. As long as that fragment remains intact and earthbound, the wizard cannot truly die, for a piece of them remains. But the process of creating a Horcrux is an act of supreme violation. To split one's soul, one must commit the supreme act of evil: murder. The murder tears the soul apart, and a dark spell can then be used to encase the torn portion within an object. The idea fascinated him. Immortality, true and lasting, was within his grasp. He needed to know more. He approached Professor Slughorn, his gullible and fame-loving potions master. Under the guise of academic curiosity, in the cozy atmosphere of one of Slughorn's exclusive student gatherings, Tom asked about Horcruxes. Slughorn was initially flustered, horrified that a student would even know the term. But Tom's flattery and his apparent intellectual thirst were persuasive. He told Tom that this was all hypothetical, of course. Tom pressed him. He asked Slughorn what would happen if a wizard were to create not just one, but multiple Horcruxes. Slughorn was appalled by the idea. He explained that the soul was meant to remain whole. To split it once was a terrible act. To split it 7 times, the most magically powerful number, was to mutilate it beyond recognition, to risk becoming less than human. But he had answered the question. It was possible. Tom had his answer. 7 pieces of his soul, 7 Horcruxes. He would be immortal, beyond the reach of any enemy. The plan began to form in his mind. He would need 6 significant objects to house the fragments of his soul, and the 7th part would remain in his own body. He already had one murder to his name, that of Myrtle Warren. He decided his first Horcrux would be a vessel for his 16-year-old self, a way to preserve his memory and his legacy as the heir of Slytherin. He took a simple blank diary he had purchased in London and poured his soul into it. He enchanted it to be more than just a container. It would be a weapon, capable of possessing a reader, of draining their life force to restore his own. He left instructions within its pages, a ghostly echo of himself, to one day reopen the Chamber of Secrets and continue Slytherin's noble work. It was a perfect monument to his early genius, a testament to his power and his heritage, and the first step on his path to eternal life. He had found the secret to immortality, and he was willing to pay any price to achieve it. Tom Riddle's time at Hogwarts was thus a masterclass in deception, where he cultivated a faultless public image while secretly unlocking ancient secrets, committing murder, and plotting his own immortality. After graduating from Hogwarts, Tom Riddle, the brilliant head boy, the student of limitless promise, stunned his professors by taking a menial job. He turned down prestigious offers from the Ministry of Magic to become a simple shop assistant at Borgin and Burkes, a notorious establishment in the dark alleyway of Nocturne Alley. Borgin and Burkes specialized in the buying and selling of dark arts artifacts, and its clientele was a sordid collection of wizards and witches with questionable morals and dangerous secrets. Horace Slughorn was deeply disappointed, seeing it as a waste of prodigious talent. Albus Dumbledore, however, was not surprised. He understood that Tom was not seeking a career. He was continuing his education, but in a field far darker than any offered at Hogwarts. The shop was the perfect place for him. His charm, which he had honed to a fine point at school, was a powerful tool. He could persuade wealthy but foolish witches to part with their most treasured and often cursed possessions. Caractacus Burke, the owner, was delighted with his new employee. Tom was efficient, knowledgeable, and had a knack for acquiring items the shop could sell for a handsome profit. But Tom's motives were his own. He was not there for the salary. He was there to hunt for treasures, not for their monetary value, but for their historical and magical significance. He was searching for the remaining artifacts of the Hogwarts founders, objects worthy of containing the precious fragments of his soul. His work led him to an elderly, immensely wealthy, and rather vain witch named Hepzibah Smith. Hepzibah was a collector of magical antiques, and she was particularly proud of two of her possessions. She was also quite taken with the handsome, flattering young man from Borgin and Burkes who came to visit her. During one of his visits, hoping to impress him, she decided to show him her greatest treasures. The first was a small golden cup, delicately wrought, with a badger engraved upon it. It had, she claimed, belonged to Helga Hufflepuff, another of the Hogwarts founders. Tom held the cup, and a covetous gleam entered his eyes. It was a priceless piece of magical history, a perfect vessel for a piece of his soul. Then, Hepzibah showed him her other prize, the item she was most proud of. It was a heavy golden locket, marked with the serpentine S of Salazar Slytherin. She told him she had purchased it from Caractacus Burke himself, who had bought it from a destitute young witch many years ago. Tom recognized it instantly. It was the locket that had belonged to his mother, Merope Gaunt, the one she had been forced to sell for a mere 10 galleons. He saw it not just as a founder's artifact, but as his own birthright, stolen from his family by poverty and weakness. A dangerous red glow flared for a moment in his eyes, a flicker of the rage he kept so tightly controlled. Hepzibah, in her vanity, did not see the danger. She saw only a young man overcome with admiration. 2 days later, Hepzibah Smith was found dead. The official cause was determined to be an accident, a fatal mistake made by her elderly house elf, Hoki. The elf confessed to mistakenly putting poison into her mistress's evening cocoa instead of sugar. Hoki's memory of the event was muddled and confused, a classic sign of magical tampering. She was convicted, and the matter was closed. But Dumbledore, who later investigated the murder, suspected the truth. He believed that Tom Riddle had visited Hepzibah one last time. He had murdered her, then used his powerful magical abilities to implant a false memory in the mind of the house elf, framing her for the crime. It was a cruelly elegant solution, echoing his framing of Hagrid years before Tom Riddle vanished. He quit his job at Borgin and Burkes, and along with him, Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket disappeared. He had acquired 2 more of his chosen Horcruxes. Before his disappearance, however, there was another piece of his past that required his attention, the lingering stain of his Muggle father. Sometime during his years working at Borgin and Burkes, he traveled to Little Hangleton, the village of his ancestors. He went to the dilapidated Gaunt shack, where he found his uncle, Morphin. Morphin was even more degraded than before, living in filth, his mind addled by years of isolation and hatred. Tom questioned his uncle, learning the story of his father, the handsome Muggle from the big house on the hill, who had run off and left his mother. Morphin, in his broken parcel tongue, confirmed everything Tom had suspected. The story filled Tom with a cold, righteous fury. He was there for revenge. He went to the Riddle house, the grand mansion where his father lived with his own parents. He confronted them. What happened in that house is known only by its outcome. The Riddles, a man and his elderly parents, were all found dead in their drawing room. They were unmarked, with expressions of terror frozen on their faces. The Muggle authorities were baffled. There was no poison, no sign of violence. They could find no cause of death. The wizarding world knew better. This was the work of the killing curse, Avada Kedavra. Tom had murdered his father and grandparents, severing the last link to his shameful Muggle past. It was a symbolic act of patricide, a final rejection of the name Tom Riddle. But he was not finished. He returned to the Gaunt shack. There he altered Morphin's memory, just as he would later do with Hoki the house elf. He implanted the memory of the murders in his uncle's mind, making Morphin believe that he was the one who had killed the Riddles. As an extra piece of damning evidence, he took the Gaunt ring from Morphin's finger. When the ministry officials arrived, they found Morphin proudly confessing to the crime. boasting that he had finally gotten revenge on the Muggle who had dishonored his sister. He was sent to Azkaban for the murders and died there years later, clutching the belief that he had defended his family's honor. Tom Riddle now had the Gaunt ring, the last heirloom of his wizarding family. He had committed the murders necessary to create more Horcruxes. The murder of his father was used to turn the ring into his next Horcrux. He wore it for a time at Hogwarts, a symbol of his Slytherin heritage. He was unaware of the ring's other secret, that the black stone was not just an adornment. It was the Resurrection Stone, one of the 3 legendary Deathly Hallows. But he cared nothing for its ability to recall the dead. He saw only a symbol of his lineage and a vessel for his soul. He placed a powerful curse upon the ring as well, a deadly defense for the fragment of soul within it. With the murders of Hepzibah Smith and his father's family, and the acquisition of the cup, the locket, and the ring, Tom Riddle had everything he needed. He disappeared from public view for a decade. He traveled the world, delving deeper into the dark arts than any wizard before him. He experimented with his Horcruxes, performed terrible acts of magic, and began the slow, horrifying process of mutilating his own soul. The Horcrux project was the central pillar of his existence. The diary held the memory of his youth. The ring held the legacy of his pure blood ancestry. The locket of Slytherin and the cup of Hufflepuff connected him to the history of Hogwarts itself. He still needed 2 more. He found one in the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, another of the Hogwarts founders. Legend said it was enchanted to grant wisdom to the wearer. He discovered its story, that Ravenclaw's daughter, Helena, had stolen it and hidden it in a forest in Albania before being murdered. As a charismatic student at Hogwarts, Tom had charmed the ghost of Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady, into revealing its location. Years later, during his travels, he retrieved it. The murder he used to desecrate this object of wisdom is unknown, that of an Albanian peasant. For his final Horcrux, he chose something different, not a dead object, but a living creature, his companion, the giant snake Nagini. Using a living being was a perilous and complex piece of magic, but it suited his sense of grandeur and his affinity for serpents. The murder used to create this Horcrux was that of Bertha Jorkins, a Ministry of Magic employee who had stumbled upon information about his servant, Barty Crouch Jr., and was subsequently captured and destroyed by Voldemort after he extracted the information from her. With each Horcrux he created, he tore his soul further, and the consequences became visible. His handsome features began to melt and distort. His skin grew waxy and pale, his face more serpentine. His eyes took on a permanent, feverish red glow, with slits for pupils like a cat or a snake. He was shedding his humanity, piece by piece, becoming something other, something fashioned by his own dark will. This physical transformation was mirrored by a metaphysical one. With each soul-splitting, his capacity for love, for empathy, for any human connection, withered and died. He became incapable of understanding these emotions, seeing them only as weaknesses to be exploited in others. His fears were reduced to one single overriding terror: death. Every other fear, the fear of pain, of humiliation, of loneliness, was consumed by this one obsession. He did not fear a dishonorable life, only an end to it. The man who returned to Britain after years abroad was no longer Tom Riddle. He was a monster of his own creation, a being held together by ambition, power, and the fractured pieces of a deliberately shattered soul. He called himself Lord Voldemort, and he demanded that his followers never speak his old name again. He was ready to begin his conquest of the wizarding world. After a decade of plumbing the depths of dark magic abroad, Lord Voldemort returned to Britain, no longer the handsome Tom Riddle but a terrifying, snake-like creature. Having already created several Horcruxes to secure his immortality, he did not return quietly. His reappearance marked the beginning of a reign of terror that would come to be known as the First Wizarding War. He began to gather his followers, the same group of Slytherin loyalists from his school days, now grown men and women in positions of influence and power. They were joined by others, wizards and witches drawn to his message of pure blood supremacy, tempted by promises of power, or simply too terrified to refuse him. He called them his Death Eaters. He branded them with a mark, the Dark Mark, a skull with a serpent protruding from its mouth like a tongue. It was burned into their left forearms, a symbol of their allegiance that would sting and burn whenever he summoned them. The Death Eater culture was one of fear and absolute obedience. Voldemort did not inspire loyalty through affection or respect. He commanded it through terror. His followers feared him even more than they feared his enemies. He was a capricious master, prone to punishing failure with torture or death. He used the unforgivable curses with casual ease. The Imperious Curse to control the minds of his puppets, the Cruciatus Curse to inflict unbearable pain, and the Killing Curse to eliminate any who stood in his way. This was the foundation of his power, a strategic and widespread use of fear that paralyzed his opposition and sowed chaos throughout the wizarding community. His strategy was not one of open warfare, but of infiltration and terrorism. He aimed to destabilize the Ministry of Magic from within. Death Eaters and their Imperious victims worked inside the ministry, creating confusion, spreading misinformation, and removing key figures who opposed him. At the same time, his followers carried out brutal and seemingly random attacks on Muggles and Muggleborns. These acts were designed to create an atmosphere of constant, pervasive fear. No one felt safe. The magical community was torn apart by suspicion and paranoia. Families who had been neighbors for generations looked at each other with distrust. Voldemort also sought to bolster his army by recruiting those who lived on the fringes of wizarding society. He promised power and acceptance to beings who had long been marginalized and persecuted. He went to the giants, offering them a chance to reclaim their ancient lands and take revenge on the wizards who had driven them into hiding. He appealed to the werewolves, led by the savage Fenrir Greyback, promising them freedom from the restrictive laws that governed their lives. He created an army of inferi, enchanted corpses reanimated by dark magic, a mindless and terrifying force that could not be killed by conventional means. His power grew steadily, and for a time, it seemed that nothing could stop him. The ministry was losing control, and the opposition was scattered and desperate. In the midst of this rising darkness, a small group of wizards and witches formed a secret society dedicated to fighting Voldemort. Led by Albus Dumbledore, they called themselves the Order of the Phoenix. They fought a secret war, operating outside the law, trying to hold back the tide of Voldemort's influence. It was a desperate and dangerous time. Members of the Order were hunted and killed. Families were destroyed. The wizarding world lived under a shadow of fear. Then, at the height of his power, a prophecy was made. It was delivered by Sybil Trelawney, a candidate for the divination professorship at Hogwarts, during an interview with Albus Dumbledore in a room above the Hogshead pub. The prophecy spoke of a boy, born at the end of July, whose parents had thrice defied Voldemort. This boy, it was foretold, would have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. It also contained a crucial ambiguity. Voldemort himself would mark the boy as his equal. A part of this prophecy was overheard. A Death Eater, Severus Snape, was listening at the door. He heard the beginning, the part about a child born at the end of July, to parents who had defied Voldemort, but he was discovered and thrown out before he could hear the rest. He rushed to his master with this vital piece of intelligence. Voldemort, whose greatest fear was his own mortality, became obsessed with this prophecy. It represented the one true threat to his eternal reign. There were two boys who fit the prophecy's description. One was Neville Longbottom, a pure blood, son of two celebrated Aurors, Frank and Alice Longbottom. The other was Harry Potter, a half-blood, son of James and Lily Potter, two gifted and defiant members of the Order of the Phoenix. Voldemort was faced with a choice. In his arrogance, he saw a reflection of himself in the half-blood boy, Harry Potter. He chose to believe that Harry was the child the prophecy spoke of. It was a fatal misreading, a decision driven by his own history, and his contempt for anything he did not consider to be a reflection of his own greatness. He decided that this infant threat must be eliminated. The Potters knew they were being hunted. On Dumbledore's advice, they went into hiding, protected by the Fidelius charm, a powerful piece of magic that concealed a secret within the soul of a chosen secret keeper. Their location, a house in the village of Godric's Hollow, was known only to their secret keeper. Their friends, Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, urged them to choose carefully. They trusted their close friend Peter Pettigrew to be their secret keeper, believing no one would suspect such a weak and unremarkable wizard. But Pettigrew was a traitor. He had been secretly serving Voldemort for a year, feeding him information about the Order of the Phoenix. He betrayed the Potter's location to his master. On Halloween night, 1981, Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow. He was at the zenith of his power, confident and utterly ruthless. He walked through the village, the muggles on the street, not even noticing the dark, hooded figure passing among them. He blasted the door of the Potter's house open. James Potter met him at the door, wandless, and shouting for his wife to take their son and run. Voldemort cut him down with a flash of green light from the killing curse, without a second thought. He then ascended the stairs to the nursery. There he found Lily Potter, standing in front of the crib, shielding her 1-year-old son with her body. She had no wand. Voldemort, perhaps feeling a flicker of something, a cold appreciation for the pure magical blood of the woman before him, offered her a chance to stand aside. He had promised Severus Snape, who had once loved Lily, that he would spare her, but Lily refused. She begged him to kill her instead, to spare her son. She would not move. Her refusal was not just an act of bravery, it was an act of profound, selfless love. Voldemort, who could not comprehend such a power, grew impatient. He killed her as he had killed her husband. With Lily Potter's death, a deep and ancient magic was invoked. Her willing sacrifice, the act of giving her life for her son, when she had been given a clear choice to save herself, created a powerful, lingering protection. It was a magic that Voldemort, in his arrogance and his ignorance of love, did not understand and could not detect. He turned his wand on the infant Harry Potter, the last obstacle. He uttered the words of the killing curse, Avada Kedavra, and sent a jet of green light hurtling towards the child. But the curse rebounded. The sacrificial protection left by Lily acted as a shield. The curse, unable to touch the boy, ricocheted back upon its caster. In that moment, Lord Voldemort's body was destroyed. The curse ripped his soul from his corporeal form, leaving nothing but a pile of black robes and a smoking wand. The power of his own curse was so immense that it blasted a part of the house apart and left a single lightning bolt-shaped scar on the forehead of the boy in the crib. But Voldemort did not die. His Horcruxes anchored him to life. He was reduced to something less than the meanest ghost, a formless, bodiless wraith, capable only of thought and regret. And in that moment of destruction, another terrible event occurred. The rebounding curse had not just destroyed Voldemort's body, it had also fractured his already mutilated soul one last time. A tiny fragment of it broke away and latched onto the only other living thing in the room, the infant Harry Potter. The boy, unknowingly, became a Horcrux, a container for a piece of his mortal enemy's soul. This was the mark the prophecy spoke of, the marking of his equal. Voldemort had not just failed to kill his enemy, he had inadvertently armed him with a piece of his own power and a unique insight into his own mind. The Dark Lord was gone. The First Wizarding War was over. Celebrations erupted across the wizarding world, but Voldemort was not dead. He had fled, a disembodied spirit, to the darkest corners of the world, to wait and to plot his return. Reduced to a spectral form after his killing curse rebounded, Voldemort spent years in hiding, his power broken but his life preserved by his Horcruxes, one of which now unknowingly resided within his vanquisher, Harry Potter. The years that followed the destruction of his body were a living nightmare for the being that was once Lord Voldemort. He was a wraith, a powerless spirit, less than a ghost. He could not act, only observe. He fled the scene of his downfall in Godric's Hollow and retreated to a place far from the wizarding world, a place where he was unlikely to be found. He chose a remote forest in Albania. There he lingered, a shadow among shadows. His only hope for a return to form was to possess the body of another living creature. He took to possessing snakes, the creatures with whom he had the greatest affinity. But their bodies were not strong enough to contain him for long. They would sicken and die, and he would be forced to find another. It was a wretched, parasitic existence, a humiliating fall for a being who had once commanded armies and made the magical world tremble. He spent a decade in this state, weak and isolated. He was aware of the passage of time, aware that his followers, the Death Eaters, had either been killed, captured, or had renounced him to save themselves. He heard whispers, carried on the wind or by the animals he possessed, of the boy who had defeated him. Harry Potter was famous, the boy who lived. The story of his survival was a legend. Voldemort festered in his Albanian exile, consumed by a powerless rage and a desperate longing for a body, for power, for revenge. Help came from an unlikely source. A young, stuttering, and deeply insecure wizard named Quirinus Quirrell was traveling through Albania. Quirrell had been the defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts, and he had a foolish and arrogant belief that he could find the remains of the Dark Lord and achieve a glory that had always eluded him. He found Voldemort. He was no match for the Dark Lord's disembodied but still powerful mind. Voldemort easily bent the weak-willed Quirrell to his purpose. He possessed him, latching onto his body like a parasite. It was a grotesque symbiosis. Voldemort's face appeared on the back of Quirrell's head, a monstrous chalk-white visage with glaring red eyes, which Quirrell kept concealed beneath a large purple turban. Sharing a body with another was agonizing for them both. Quirrell's body was weakened by the possession, and Voldemort's spirit was disgusted by its dependence on such a pathetic host. Furthermore, physical contact with anyone pure of heart or spirit caused Quirrell, and by extension Voldemort, excruciating pain. Voldemort directed Quirrell back to Britain, back to Hogwarts. His plan was simple and audacious. He would use Quirrell to steal the one object that could restore him to a full, powerful body, the Philosopher's Stone. The stone, created by the famous alchemist Nicholas Flamel, could produce the elixir of life, which granted immortality. Dumbledore, suspecting that Voldemort might one day seek the stone, had moved it from Gringotts Wizarding Bank to the safety of Hogwarts Castle, where it was protected by a series of powerful enchantments. Voldemort, through Quirrell, made several attempts to steal the stone. He broke into Gringotts, only to find the vault empty. He tried to get past the three-headed dog, Fluffy, that guarded the trapdoor to the stone's hiding place. He began to drink the blood of unicorns in the Forbidden Forest, a monstrous act that could sustain a cursed life, but at a terrible cost. All the while, he was operating under the nose of Albus Dumbledore, and more immediately, he was being investigated by the very boy who had caused his downfall, Harry Potter, now a first-year student at Hogwarts. The final confrontation took place deep beneath the school, in the last chamber protecting the stone. Harry Potter, having overcome the various obstacles, found Quirrell standing before the Mirror of Erised, the final protection. The mirror showed the viewer their heart's deepest desire. Voldemort believed it would show him how to get the stone, but he could not see it. He forced Quirrell to use Harry. When Harry looked into the mirror, he did not see himself finding the stone. He saw himself with the stone already in his pocket, because his only desire was to keep it from Voldemort. The stone appeared in his pocket. Voldemort, realizing what had happened, commanded Quirrell to kill the boy. He spoke from the back of Quirrell's head, revealing his monstrous presence. Quirrell attacked Harry, but when he touched the boy's skin, his own hands began to blister and burn. Lily Potter's sacrificial protection still lived in Harry's blood. The love that had saved him as an infant now acted as a burning, deadly poison to Voldemort and anybody he possessed. Harry, realizing this, grabbed Quirrell's face, and the possessed professor's body turned to ash, destroyed by the very power Voldemort could not comprehend. The spirit of Voldemort, thwarted once again, was ripped from the ashes, a formless, shrieking wraith. He had no choice but to flee again, back to the desolate forests of Albania, his plans in ruins, his borrowed body destroyed. He was weaker than ever, having failed to regain power even with a willing host. While Voldemort was in exile, another part of his plan was unfolding, a legacy he had left behind years ago. Before his fall, he had entrusted one of his Horcruxes, his diary, to one of his most loyal Death Eaters, Lucius Malfoy. He had given Malfoy instructions to one day smuggle the diary into Hogwarts, where it could be used to reopen the Chamber of Secrets. Lucius Malfoy, after Voldemort's disappearance, had kept the diary, not daring to destroy it, but too afraid to use it. Years later, seeing an opportunity to disgrace his rival, Arthur Weasley, and to rid the school of its Muggle-born students, Malfoy acted. He slipped the diary into the cauldron of Arthur's young daughter, Ginny Weasley, among her second-hand schoolbooks. Ginny, a lonely and impressionable first-year student, found the diary. She began to write in it, and the diary wrote back. The fragment of Tom Riddle's soul that lived within its pages charmed her. He was sympathetic. He was her friend, her confidant. She poured out her heart to him, her fears, her insecurities, her crush on Harry Potter, and as she gave him her secrets, he gave her his. He slowly and insidiously possessed her, draining her life force, using her energy to grow stronger. Through her, he reopened the Chamber of Secrets. The attacks on Muggle-born students began again, just as they had 50 years before. The basilisk was loose in the castle once more. The diary was a brilliant and malicious invention. It was more than just a Horcrux, it was a weaponized piece of soul. Its purpose was twofold. First, to continue Slytherin's work of purging the school. Second, and perhaps more importantly to Tom Riddle, it was a test. It was a proof of concept for the Horcrux itself, a demonstration of how a fragment of his soul could act independently, could think, and could potentially restore him to power. The ghostly memory of Tom Riddle in the diary planned to drain Ginny Weasley's life completely, a magical transfusion that would allow him to step out of the pages of the book, a fully formed, 16-year-old Tom Riddle, restored to life. He lured Harry Potter into the chamber by having Ginny write a message on the wall in blood, declaring that her skeleton would lie in the chamber forever. Harry, along with his friend Ron Weasley, found the entrance to the chamber. Harry went down alone, where he found Ginny's unconscious body and the spectral, handsome form of a teenage Tom Riddle. Riddle explained everything: his identity as the young Voldemort, his plan to use Ginny, and his connection to Harry. He then summoned the basilisk to kill the boy. The fight was desperate. Harry, armed with the sword of Godric Gryffindor, which he had pulled from the sorting hat brought to him by Dumbledore's phoenix, Fawkes, battled the giant serpent. He was blinded by the basilisk's venom after it struck him with one of its fangs, but not before he managed to drive the sword through the roof of the snake's mouth, killing it. As he lay dying from the venom, Fawkes wept tears onto the wound. Phoenix tears have powerful healing properties, and they neutralize the poison, saving Harry's life. But the memory of Tom Riddle was still there, gloating, growing more solid as Ginny grew weaker. Harry, with a flash of insight, took one of the basilisk fangs that had broken off in his arm and plunged it into the diary. Basilisk venom is one of the few substances powerful enough to destroy a Horcrux. The diary screamed, a high, piercing sound, and a torrent of ink poured from its pages. The ghostly form of Tom Riddle exploded into nothingness. The fragment of soul was destroyed. Ginny Weasley awoke, saved. The first of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes was gone. But the real Voldemort, the main part of his soul, felt nothing. He was still hiding in Albania, unaware that the first piece of his immortality had been undone. He remained in his wretched, spectral state, his hope for a swift return to power once again dashed. The world was safe for a little longer, but the Dark Lord was patient. He had waited before, and he would wait again. Having failed to acquire the Philosopher's Stone, and unaware that his diary Horcrux had been destroyed, Voldemort lingered as a powerless spirit in Albania, his hopes for a return to a physical body growing ever dimmer. For 2 more years, Voldemort remained in his miserable exile. His strength was fading, and despair began to creep into his thoughts. He was trapped, a disembodied consciousness, in a world that had forgotten to fear him. His salvation once again came in the form of a weak and cowardly wizard. Peter Pettigrew, the man who had betrayed the Potters, had been hiding for 12 years, disguised in his animagus form as a common garden rat. After being exposed and forced to flee, Pettigrew, terrified of both the authorities and his former friends, had only one place to turn. He sought out the master he had once served, hoping for protection. Following rumors he had heard from other rats, he traveled to Albania and found the wraith of Lord Voldemort. Voldemort was initially contemptuous of the pathetic, sniveling creature, but Pettigrew was useful. He was a wizard, with a wand and hands that could perform magic. For Voldemort, he was a lifeline. With Pettigrew's help, Voldemort was able to create a rudimentary temporary body for himself. It was a grotesque mockery of a human form, something like a scaled and stunted baby, weak and helpless. But it was a body. He could be carried. He could hold a wand, and he could think more clearly than he had in years. To sustain this frail form, Voldemort and Pettigrew developed a potion using unicorn blood and, most horribly, the venom of Voldemort's snake, Nagini, whom Pettigrew had to milk by hand. With this small measure of physical existence restored, Voldemort began to formulate a new and powerful plan for his true resurrection. He had learned from his past failures. He would not rely on stealing a magical artifact or possessing a weak-willed host. He would create a new body for himself, a body that was stronger and more powerful than the one he had lost. He found the recipe in an ancient and dark spell. The ritual required 3 key ingredients: bone of the father, unknowingly given; flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed; and blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. The plan was set in motion. He sent Pettigrew to capture a Ministry of Magic official, Bertha Jorkins, who had been holidaying in Albania. From her, under torture, Voldemort extracted 2 crucial pieces of information. First, that Barty Crouch Jr., one of his most faithful Death Eaters, whom the world believed had died in Azkaban, was actually alive and being hidden by his father. Second, that Hogwarts would be hosting the Triwizard Tournament, a major international wizarding event that would provide the perfect cover for his plan. After gleaning this information, he killed Bertha Jorkins. That murder, as noted, was the one he used to turn Nagini into his final Horcrux. Voldemort and Pettigrew traveled back to Britain. They rescued Barty Crouch Jr. and placed his father under the Imperious Curse. Voldemort then dispatched Crouch Jr., a wizard of considerable skill and fanatic loyalty, to infiltrate Hogwarts. Using Polyjuice Potion, Crouch Jr. disguised himself as the famous Auror, Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, who had been hired as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. From this position, Crouch Jr. could manipulate the Triwizard Tournament from the inside. His mission was to ensure that Harry Potter, the enemy whose blood Voldemort required, would win the tournament. Throughout the school year, the disguised Crouch Jr. guided Harry through the tournament's dangerous tasks. He helped him get past the dragon in the first task and gave him the clue for the second task in the lake. He ensured that Harry would reach the center of the final task's maze first. The goal of the maze was to reach the Triwizard Cup, which stood in the center. Crouch Jr. had turned the cup into a portkey, a magical object that would transport whoever touched it to a prearranged destination. On the night of the final task, Harry Potter and the other Hogwarts champion, Cedric Diggory, reached the cup at the same time. In a gesture of sportsmanship, they decided to take it together. The moment their hands touched the cup, the portkey activated. They were whisked away from the grounds of Hogwarts, not to the front of the maze as they expected, but to a dark and overgrown graveyard. It was the graveyard in Little Hangleton, the final resting place of the Riddle family. Pettigrew was there, waiting, carrying the small, weak form of Lord Voldemort. The moment they arrived, Voldemort gave the order, "Kill the spare." Pettigrew raised his wand, and with a flash of green light, Cedric Diggory was killed. Harry was then bound tightly to the marble headstone of Tom Riddle Sr. The ritual was about to begin. Pettigrew dropped Voldemort's stunted form into a large, bubbling cauldron. Then, he performed the steps of the dark ritual. First, the bone of the father. He took a long, thin knife and pried a splinter of bone from the grave beneath Harry's feet, dropping it into the cauldron. Next, the flesh of the servant. Pettigrew, weeping with a mixture of terror and self-pity, raised the same knife and, with a single swift motion, severed his own right hand, which fell into the potion. Finally, the blood of the enemy. Pettigrew approached Harry and drove the point of the knife into his arm, drawing blood. He collected it in a vial and added it to the cauldron. The potion inside the cauldron began to hiss and sparkle, turning a blinding white. A tall, skeletal man rose from within it, as pale as bone, his face whiter than a skull, with wide, livid scarlet eyes and a nose that was as flat as a snake's with slits for nostrils. Lord Voldemort was reborn. He had a body once more, a body fashioned from dark magic, and it was more powerful than the one he had lost. His first act was to summon his Death Eaters. He pressed his finger to the dark mark on Pettigrew's remaining arm, and one by one, his followers began to apparate into the graveyard. Their faces hidden by masks, he chastised them for their disloyalty, for believing he was gone forever, for not searching for him. He rewarded Pettigrew for his service by creating a new silver hand for him, a hand of immense strength. Then, he turned his attention to Harry Potter. The graveyard scene was not just about resurrection. It was about symbolism. Voldemort wanted to prove his superiority, to defeat Harry Potter in front of his returned followers, to undo the humiliation of his past defeat. He explained to Harry how he had survived, how he had returned. He also made a crucial error. By taking Harry's blood into his own body, he had inadvertently absorbed a part of Lily Potter's sacrificial protection. This meant that the protection no longer just resided in Harry. It now flowed in Voldemort's own veins. He had tethered Harry to life. As long as Voldemort lived, Lily's protection would endure, and Harry could not be killed by him. Voldemort, of course, did not understand this. He believed he had taken the boy's power and made himself immune to it. He untied Harry and returned his wand, determined to duel him, to prove that he was the stronger wizard. The duel began. Voldemort cast the killing curse, and Harry, acting on pure instinct, cast a disarming charm. The two spells met in mid-air, a jet of green light colliding with a jet of red. A strange and powerful magical effect occurred. Because Harry's wand and Voldemort's wand shared a core from the same phoenix, Fox, they could not be forced to battle one another. This phenomenon was called priori incantatum. A golden, bead-like light connected the two wands, and Harry, concentrating with all his might, forced the bead along the thread of light towards Voldemort. As the bead of light touched Voldemort's wand, His wand began to regurgitate the spells it had recently performed, in reverse order. Ghostly echoes of Cedric Diggory, of the old muggle Frank Bryce whom Voldemort had murdered months before, and finally, of Harry's own parents, James and Lily Potter, emerged from the wand. These echoes were not alive, but they were conscious. They provided a momentary distraction, a shield for Harry. They encouraged him, telling him to break the connection and run. He did. The moment he broke the spell, the echoes swarmed Voldemort, and Harry dashed for the portkey, grabbing Cedric's body on the way. He touched the cup and was instantly transported back to the grounds of Hogwarts, leaving a stunned and furious Voldemort behind in the graveyard with his bewildered Death Eaters. Harry had escaped, and he brought with him the terrible news. Lord Voldemort had returned. The Dark Lord had his body back. His followers were reassembling, and the wizarding world, which had enjoyed 13 years of peace, was once again on the brink of war. Voldemort's resurrection was complete, but his triumph was marred by the boys' escape. The connection between them, now deeper and more complex than ever, was destined to shape the conflict to come. Lord Voldemort had successfully returned to a physical body, but his public triumph was thwarted by Harry Potter's escape, leaving the wizarding world, particularly the Ministry of Magic, in a state of willful denial about his comeback. The year following his resurrection was a period of calculated patience and strategic maneuvering for Lord Voldemort. He understood that his greatest weapon in these early stages was disbelief. The Ministry of Magic, under the complacent and politically motivated leadership of Cornelius Fudge, refused to accept the truth of his return. Fudge feared that the news would cause mass panic and destabilize his own position. He chose to discredit Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore, launching a smear campaign that painted them as liars and attention seekers. This denial was a gift to Voldemort. It gave him time to operate in the shadows, to consolidate his power without facing a united opposition. While the ministry buried its head in the sand, Dumbledore took action. He reformed the Order of the Phoenix, gathering the old members and recruiting new ones to fight the secret war that he knew was coming. Voldemort, meanwhile, focused on strengthening his own forces. He freed his most loyal followers from Azkaban, engineering a mass breakout that the ministry was forced to acknowledge, though they tried to blame it on Sirius Black. These were his most ruthless and devoted Death Eaters, the inner circle who had been imprisoned for their loyalty, and their return significantly bolstered his ranks. He also renewed his recruitment efforts among those magical beings who felt wronged by the wizarding establishment. He sent envoys to the Giants, seeking to win their allegiance before Dumbledore could. The Giants were a powerful but dwindling race, and their support would be a major asset in any open conflict. He also continued to court the werewolves through Fenrir Greyback, promising them a status and freedom they had never known. He was building an army not just of dark wizards, but of all who held a grudge against the world that had shunned them. His strategy was to create a force so overwhelming and terrifying that resistance would seem futile. His primary objective during this period was to acquire the full prophecy that had led to his downfall. He knew that Severus Snape had only heard the first part. The complete record of the prophecy was stored in a glass sphere in the Department of Mysteries, a highly secure and secretive branch of the Ministry of Magic. Voldemort needed to hear the rest of it, convinced that it held the key to destroying Harry Potter. However, he could not enter the ministry himself without revealing his return to the world. Furthermore, the prophecies in the Hall of Prophecy could only be retrieved by those about whom they were made. This meant that only he or Harry Potter could take it from its shelf. This led to a new focus, manipulating Harry. Voldemort had become aware of the strange connection between their minds, a link forged the night he had inadvertently made Harry a Horcrux. He discovered that he could, under certain conditions, project thoughts and visions into Harry's mind. He began to exploit this connection, sending Harry disturbing dreams and flashes of his own thoughts and emotions. He used it as a weapon, a way to torment and confuse the boy. His ultimate goal was to plant a false vision in Harry's mind, a vision so convincing that Harry would be lured into the Department of Mysteries to save someone he cared about. Once there, he could be forced to retrieve the prophecy for Voldemort. The plan culminated at the end of Harry's 5th year at Hogwarts. Voldemort planted a vivid vision in Harry's mind, showing his godfather Sirius Black being tortured by Voldemort himself in the Department of Mysteries. The vision was a trap, but Harry, overcome with fear for Sirius, believed it was real. Despite warnings from his friends, he and a small group of his classmates flew to London and broke into the Ministry of Magic. They found their way to the Hall of Prophecy and located the sphere with Harry's name on it. But Sirius was not there. Instead, they were ambushed by a dozen of Voldemort's Death Eaters, led by Lucius Malfoy. A desperate battle ensued in the mysterious, shifting rooms of the department. The students fought bravely, but they were outmatched. Members of the Order of the Phoenix, alerted to the situation, arrived to help, and the battle escalated. During the chaos, the glass sphere containing the prophecy was shattered, its words lost forever. In the midst of the fighting, Sirius Black was killed by his cousin, the fanatical Death Eater Bellatrix Lestrange. Just as the battle seemed lost, Albus Dumbledore arrived. He single-handedly defeated most of the Death Eaters. But then Voldemort himself appeared, furious that his plan had failed and the prophecy was destroyed. What followed was a legendary duel between the two most powerful wizards of the age. They battled in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, their spells shattering statues and tearing up the floor. Voldemort possessed Harry, hoping to force Dumbledore to kill the boy to defeat him. But the love Harry felt for his lost godfather, a wave of pure grief and affection, was an agony to Voldemort's soul, and he was forced out of the boy's body. At that moment, Ministry officials, including Cornelius Fudge himself, arrived through the Floo network. They saw Lord Voldemort with their own eyes, standing in the middle of the wrecked atrium just before he disapparated, taking Bellatrix Lestrange with him. The truth could no longer be denied. Voldemort had returned. The Ministry's year of denial was over, and the Second Wizarding War had truly begun. With his return now public knowledge, Voldemort shifted his strategy from stealth to open terror and the consolidation of his power base, putting immense pressure on key individuals to weaken the resistance against him. The public revelation of Voldemort's return threw the wizarding world into a state of panic and fear that he had long cultivated. The Ministry of Magic, now under the new leadership of Rufus Scrimgeour, was forced to acknowledge the threat, but their response was often heavy-handed and ineffective. They arrested people on flimsy evidence, creating an atmosphere of suspicion that played into Voldemort's hands. He, in turn, escalated his campaign of terror. There were mysterious disappearances, unexplained accidents, and brutal murders. The Giants were on the march, and Dementors, the soul-sucking guards of Azkaban, had abandoned their posts to join him, spreading fear and despair across the land. Voldemort's own power was immense, but he was also growing increasingly paranoid. The connection to Harry Potter's mind, which he had once seen as a weapon, was now a vulnerability. After the incident at the Ministry, he realized that Harry could sometimes see into his mind as well. He began to practice occlumency, the magical defense of the mind, to shut Harry out, but the connection remained, a strange and unpredictable link between them. His other major concern was the loyalty of his followers. He trusted no one completely. His inner circle was a nest of ambition and fear, with each Death Eater vying for his favor while terrified of his wrath. This paranoia was particularly focused on two individuals, Severus Snape and Draco Malfoy. Snape had been playing a dangerous double game for years, serving as a spy for Dumbledore within the Death Eater ranks. Voldemort had always harbored doubts about Snape's true allegiance, but Snape was a masterful occlumens, his mind impenetrable. He had also provided Voldemort with valuable information over the years, including the fragment of the prophecy that had started everything. Voldemort kept him close, but watched him constantly. To test the loyalty of the Malfoy family, whose patriarch Lucius had failed him at the Department of Mysteries, Voldemort devised a cruel and seemingly impossible task for their 16-year-old son, Draco. He ordered Draco Malfoy to kill Albus Dumbledore. It was a punishment disguised as an honor. Voldemort did not expect Draco to succeed. He expected him to fail, at which point he would have an excuse to punish the entire Malfoy family, and perhaps kill the boy himself. This act of coercion served to terrorize his own followers, reminding them that no one, not even the children of his most senior Death Eaters, was safe from his displeasure. Throughout that year, Draco made several clumsy and unsuccessful attempts on Dumbledore's life, which resulted in the accidental injury of other students. Dumbledore knew what Draco was trying to do, but he protected the boy, understanding that he was acting out of fear for his family's lives. Meanwhile, Dumbledore was engaged in his own secret and perilous mission. He had begun to hunt for Voldemort's Horcruxes. He had already found and destroyed one, the Gaunt ring. He had found it in the ruins of the Gaunt shack, but in his haste to examine the resurrection stone set within it, he had put it on. Voldemort's curse on the ring had immediately taken hold, withering his hand and sending a deadly curse spreading through his body. Only Snape's timely intervention, with his knowledge of potions, had managed to contain the curse. But it was a temporary measure. Dumbledore knew he was dying. He had, at most, a year left to live. This knowledge shaped his final plans. He shared his research on the Horcruxes with Harry Potter, showing him his collected memories in the Pensieve, revealing the full story of Tom Riddle's life. He was preparing Harry for the task that he would have to complete alone, finding and destroying the remaining Horcruxes. He also made a secret and terrible pact with Severus Snape. Knowing that Draco was destined to fail, and wanting to spare the boy's soul from the act of murder, Dumbledore instructed Snape to be the one to kill him when the time came. It was an act that would cement Snape's position as Voldemort's most trusted servant, allowing him to continue protecting the students of Hogwarts from the inside. The climax came on a dark night at the top of the Hogwarts Astronomy Tower. Draco Malfoy, having succeeded in smuggling a group of Death Eaters into the castle, managed to corner and disarm a severely weakened Dumbledore. Dumbledore had just returned from a grueling journey with Harry to a sea cave where they believed a Horcrux, Slytherin's locket, was hidden. He had been forced to drink a terrible potion to retrieve it, leaving him frail and vulnerable. Draco stood before him, his wand raised, but he could not bring himself to do it. He was not a killer. The other Death Eaters arrived, urging him on, but Draco hesitated. Then, Severus Snape appeared. Dumbledore looked at Snape and gave a quiet plea. "Severus, please." Snape raised his wand and cast the killing curse. Albus Dumbledore, the only wizard Voldemort had ever feared, was dead. The Death Eaters fled, with Snape and Draco among them. Voldemort's greatest obstacle was gone. The wizarding world had lost its champion. Voldemort himself was not present for the murder. He had been lured away believing Dumbledore would be out of the castle. But the news of Dumbledore's death was a great victory. It represented the fall of the last major bastion of resistance. However, a crucial piece of magical lore had been overlooked by everyone involved. When Draco Malfoy disarmed Dumbledore on the tower, he had, without knowing it, become the true master of the Elder Wand, the most powerful wand in existence, which Dumbledore had won from the dark wizard Grindelwald years before. Voldemort, who was already beginning to obsess over the legend of the Deathly Hallows, was completely unaware of this subtle transfer of allegiance. He believed that the wand's power would pass to the one who killed its previous master. This fundamental misunderstanding of wand lore would become one of the seeds of his ultimate downfall. With Dumbledore gone, The path to total control of the wizarding world seemed clear. With Dumbledore dead and the wizarding world in shock, the hunt for Voldemort's remaining Horcruxes became the central, desperate mission for the Resistance, a race against time built on fragmented clues and family histories. The death of Albus Dumbledore was a turning point. It shattered the morale of the opposition and paved the way for Voldemort's final push for power. The Ministry of Magic, already weakened and infiltrated, fell within months. A quiet coup, orchestrated by Imperialist officials and Death Eater spies, saw the minister, Rufus Scrimgeour, captured and killed. Voldemort's puppet, Pius Thicknesse, was installed as the new minister, and the ministry became an instrument of Voldemort's will. The Reign of Terror began in earnest. A Muggle-born registration commission was established, forcing witches and wizards of non-magical parentage to submit to interrogation and imprisonment, accused of stealing magic. Hogwarts itself fell under the control of the Death Eaters. Severus Snape was appointed headmaster, and two particularly sadistic siblings, Amicus and Alecto Carrow, were installed as teachers charged with instructing students in the dark arts and enforcing a brutal regime of discipline. While Voldemort was consolidating his political power, Harry Potter, along with his friends Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, was on the run. Following Dumbledore's final instructions, they had embarked on the perilous quest to find and destroy the remaining Horcruxes. They knew of 4 that were still unaccounted for: Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem, and something connected to Nagini. The locket they had retrieved from the sea cave with Dumbledore had turned out to be a fake. Inside was a note from a mysterious R.A.B. who had stolen the real locket with the intention of destroying it. The trail of the real locket was a tangled history of family loyalty and regret. Through the house elf creature, they learned the story of Regulus Arcturus Black, Sirius Black's younger brother. Regulus had been a proud Death Eater, but he had become disillusioned with Voldemort's cruelty. When he learned of the Horcruxes, and that Voldemort had used Creature to test the defenses of the cave, and then left the elf to die, he had a change of heart. In an act of incredible bravery, Regulus and Creature returned to the cave. Regulus drank the potion himself, ordered Creature to take the real locket and destroy it, and was then dragged to his death by the Inferi in the lake. Creature, however, had been unable to destroy the locket. It had been in his possession for years, a source of dark influence, until it was stolen from the Black family house by Mundungus Fletcher. The trio tracked the locket to the Ministry of Magic itself, where it was now in the possession of the cruel and formidable Dolores Umbridge. In a daring and dangerous infiltration, they managed to steal the locket from around her neck, but they still had no way to destroy it. The Horcrux's dark magic began to affect them, amplifying their fears and resentments, particularly when one of them was wearing it. It nearly broke their friendship apart. They finally found a means of destruction when Ron Weasley, guided by Dumbledore's Deluminator, returned to find Harry in the Forest of Dean. There, Harry had found the sword of Gryffindor at the bottom of a frozen pool. Ron used the sword, one of the few items imbued with the power to destroy Horcruxes, to smash the locket, overcoming the dark visions it projected to taunt him. One more Horcrux was destroyed. Voldemort, meanwhile, was growing ever more obsessed with a different path to power. He was no longer solely focused on killing Harry Potter. He was pursuing the Elder Wand, the unbeatable wand, one of the 3 Deathly Hallows. He believed that with this wand he would be truly invincible, capable of overcoming the strange connection that protected Harry. His hunt for the wand took him across Europe, tracking its bloody history from the wandmaker Gregorovitch to the dark wizard Grindelwald. He eventually learned that its last master had been Albus Dumbledore. He concluded that the wand's power must now reside with Dumbledore's killer. He returned to Britain and went to Hogwarts, to Dumbledore's tomb. He broke it open and took the Elder Wand from the hands of Dumbledore's corpse. He was now in possession of the most powerful wand ever made. Yet, he sensed something was wrong. The wand did not feel as powerful in his hand as he had expected. It did not give him the absolute command he craved. He believed the issue was one of allegiance. He thought that because Snape had killed Dumbledore, Snape was the wand's true master. This was his critical error, born from his misunderstanding of wand lore. He did not know that Draco Malfoy had been the one to disarm Dumbledore first. The wand's allegiance had passed to Draco, not to Snape. While Voldemort was fixated on the Elder Wand, the Horcrux hunt continued. Harry, Ron, and Hermione learned of the Diadem of Ravenclaw. They discovered its hiding place within Hogwarts itself, in the Room of Requirement. They found it, but were ambushed by Draco Malfoy and his cronies. In the ensuing fight, one of Malfoy's friends unleashed a cursed fire, Fiendfire, which raged out of control. The fire destroyed the diadem, and another Horcrux was gone. Voldemort was now beginning to feel the destruction of his soul fragments. A wave of fury and fear washed over him as he realized what Harry was doing. He finally understood that his immortality was being dismantled, piece by piece. He abandoned his concerns about the Elder Wand's performance and turned his full fury on Hogwarts, the last known location of his enemy. He laid siege to the castle, demanding that Harry Potter be handed over to him. This was the beginning of the Battle of Hogwarts. The castle was defended by the remaining members of the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's army, and the students and teachers of Hogwarts. It was a desperate, heroic last stand. As the battle raged, Voldemort remained in the Shrieking Shack, still pondering the problem of the Elder Wand. He summoned Severus Snape to him. Convinced that Snape was the wand's true master and that he needed to kill him to claim its full power, Voldemort set his giant snake, Nagini, on him. He left Snape to die, believing he had finally secured mastery of the wand. But before Snape died, Harry reached him. In his final moments, Snape gave Harry his memories. In the Pensieve, Harry finally learned the whole truth. He learned of Snape's lifelong love for his mother Lily, and how that love had driven him to serve as Dumbledore's spy. He learned of the pact Snape had made with Dumbledore to kill him, and that Dumbledore had been dying anyway. And then he learned the final terrible secret. He learned that when Voldemort's curse had rebounded, a piece of Voldemort's soul had splintered off and attached itself to him. Harry himself was the final accidental Horcrux. The prophecy was true. Neither can live while the other survives. For Voldemort to be mortal, Harry Potter had to die. The stage was set for the final confrontation. Voldemort had made a fatal error based on his misunderstanding of the Elder Wand, while Harry now possessed the terrible knowledge that his own death was the key to victory. The Battle of Hogwarts was not just a fight for a castle. It was the endgame for a war that had spanned decades, all converging on a single, fateful choice. As the Battle of Hogwarts raged, Voldemort's misunderstanding of the Elder Wand's allegiance deepened, while Harry Potter walked towards his own death, armed with the devastating knowledge that he himself was the final Horcrux. Armed with this terrible truth from Snape's memories, Harry Potter made his decision. He walked out of the castle, into the Forbidden Forest, to the place where Voldemort and his Death Eaters were waiting. He was ready to sacrifice himself. Voldemort, seeing his enemy approach, defenseless and willing, felt a surge of triumphant joy. This was the moment he had waited for, the final, public humiliation and destruction of the boy who had been a thorn in his side for so long. He raised the Elder Wand, the wand he believed he now fully commanded, and uttered the two words he had longed to say, Avada Kedavra. A flash of green light erupted from the wand, and Harry Potter fell to the ground, seemingly dead. But he was not dead. He awoke in a place that seemed like King's Cross Station, misty and white. There he met the spirit of Albus Dumbledore, who explained everything. When Voldemort had used Harry's blood to rebuild his own body, he had tethered Lily's protection to himself. This meant that while Voldemort lived, Harry could not truly die at his hand. The killing curse had killed the piece of Voldemort's soul that lived within Harry, the accidental Horcrux. It had destroyed the link between them, but left Harry's own soul unharmed. He was now free of the part of Voldemort he had carried for so long. Dumbledore gave him a choice. He could go on, or he could go back. Harry chose to go back. He lay still on the forest floor, feigning death. Voldemort, believing he had finally won, ordered the captured Rubeus Hagrid to carry Harry's body back to the castle as a trophy. He presented the dead Harry to the defenders of Hogwarts, demanding their surrender. It was a moment of absolute despair for the resistance, but Neville Longbottom, in an act of supreme defiance, stood up to Voldemort. As he spoke, the sorting hat, which he had pulled from a pile of rubble, burst into flames on his head, and from it he drew the sword of Gryffindor. At that moment, Harry chose to reveal himself. He threw off the invisibility cloak he had been hiding under, and the battle reignited with a new ferocity. While the fighting surged around them, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Neville Longbottom used the sword of Gryffindor to kill Nagini, the last remaining Horcrux. With the snake's death, Lord Voldemort was mortal once more. All the anchors that tied his soul to the world were gone. He was, for the first time in decades, vulnerable to death. The final confrontation took place in the Great Hall. It was just Voldemort and Harry circling each other. Harry explained to Voldemort his fatal mistakes. He explained the truth about Snape's loyalty and Dumbledore's plan, and then he explained the critical error concerning the Elder Wand. He told Voldemort that the wand's allegiance was not won by killing, but by defeating its master. Draco Malfoy had been the one to disarm Dumbledore, making him the wand's true master. But weeks before, Harry had defeated Draco, wresting his wand from him at Malfoy Manor. In that moment, the Elder Wand's allegiance had transferred from Draco to Harry. Harry Potter was the true master of the Elder Wand. Voldemort refused to believe it. In a final, desperate act of arrogant rage, he cast the killing curse at Harry, at the same moment that Harry cast a simple, disarming charm. The Elder Wand, in Voldemort's hand, recognized its true master in Harry. It would not kill him. Instead, Voldemort's own curse rebounded upon him, just as it had in Godric's Hollow all those years ago. But this time, there were no Horcruxes to save him. The green light of the curse struck him, and Tom Marvolo Riddle, Lord Voldemort, fell to the ground, dead. His body lay there, pale and shrunken, a mere mortal man. His reign of terror was over. The aftermath of the Battle of Hogwarts was one of both celebration and mourning. The wizarding world was free, but the cost had been immense. Families were shattered, institutions were broken, and a generation was scarred by war. The survivors had to reckon with the legacy of Voldemort's rule, the deep-seated prejudices he had exploited, and the corruption he had sown. The work of rebuilding was not just about repairing buildings, but about healing a fractured society. The story of Tom Riddle is a profound cautionary tale. It is the story of a gifted and talented boy who was corrupted by his own fear and ambition. His obsession with his bloodline led him to reject his humanity. His terror of death drove him to mutilate his own soul. Becoming a monster in his quest for immortality, he built his power on the foundations of fear and division. But terror is a brittle tool of rule. It exhausts the competent, alienates potential allies, and ultimately breeds the very defiance that seeks to overthrow it. His formidable power was ultimately undone by the things he could never understand. He could not comprehend the strength of a mother's love, the loyalty of friendship, the courage of self-sacrifice. He saw these things as weaknesses, and in his blindness, he was repeatedly defeated by them. He sought ultimate control, but he never understood the difference between domination and mastery. He could command the Elder Wand, but he could not master it, because its allegiance could not be taken by force. He sought to create a lasting legacy, but he built nothing that would endure. His followers scattered, his ideology was discredited, and his only lasting mark on the world was the pain he had caused. In the end, Tom Riddle's life was a tragic paradox. In his pursuit of eternal life, he destroyed his own soul. In his quest for absolute power, he became a slave to his own fears. And in his attempt to become a legend, he became a lesson about the corrupting nature of unchecked ambition, the self-defeating logic of supremacy, and the simple, enduring truth that a life without love is a life that has already been lost. The boy who wanted to be special, unique, and permanent ended as nothing but a broken soul and a bad memory, defeated by the ordinary, human connections he had always disdained.